Welcome to toy-polloi. No Legos were harmed in the making of this video.
Hello and welcome to toy-polloi and part 2 of my vintage Star Wars Kenner Death Star restoration. In part 1 you saw me fix areas on the ground floor, so we made new foam for the trash compactor, new glass panels to go in the side of that, and we even made a custom floor panel which you can see here. Because the playset back in the day didn't have anything on the ground floor, you just put it on your carpet, and I always thought that looked a little bit sort of plain and boring, so I made a new custom panel. So make sure and check out part 1 of this restoration to see how all of that was completed. Now in this video we're going to be starting work on the next 2 floors because there are always issues with those floors, mainly the struts and the paperwork that's damaged and missing. So let's crack straight on with this restoration. Probably the most common broken part on the Death Star are these support struts. Each level is held up by a varying number of these struts, and each strut is slightly different from the others, and so if one breaks it's very hard to find replacements, but they are relatively straightforward to fix. Sometimes you're lucky and the support strut will break just like this, where the top 2 parts are snapped off, and you will have the broken off snapped part which will be stuck in the floor above or below, and you can just remove that using a pair of pliers. Now if you've got this bit, that's great because that really does make this job a lot easier. We can just glue this back in place using some plastic weld, and that will create a very strong weld. But more often than not the part is completely missing, so we're going to have to reconstruct that from scratch. So first up, let's start by gluing this one back in place, and I'll show you the best way to do that. For this part we are going to be using some plastic weld because you can see I have the tab that has snapped off. This was just stuck in the top section. I pulled it out with a pair of pliers and it fits perfectly. You can see there's a nice clean break there. So we are going to be using plastic weld. You can pick this up from most model suppliers, and this stuff dissolves the plastic, or the very edge of the plastic, and gives a bond supposedly as strong as the original plastic would have been. So what we need to do is take the top off this. This stuff evaporates very quickly, so you don't leave the top off particularly long. I'm going to hold these 2 pieces together in the right position so you can see that these are all lined up, and I'm going to get some plastic weld on my brush here, and I'm just going to gently touch that onto the edge, and the capillary action should pull it into the join. That's the idea of the plastic weld. We'll just drop a little bit on, and we'll do that all the way around, and then we just have to let it sort of evaporate away. It takes a few minutes and you should end up with a very nice strong bond that, as I say, is as good as the original. We shouldn't have any problems with using this back on the Death Star. Now because this is hidden, I don't have to be particularly neat. Sometimes you may want to do this as a very neat fix, but in this instance, as it is fully hidden, I'm not going to worry too much. I just want to make sure that this is nicely dissolved and gives a very strong weld, so I'm going to sort of carefully wipe this over the surface as well, like so. You can actually see the plastic start to dissolve a little bit, and that's what you want. Right, so we can now leave this. You want to leave it for sort of 20 minutes or so, really, just so everything is evaporated and the plastic has had time to set again, and that will give you a very strong bond, and we can use that straight away in the Death Star. But now we can move on to replacing these missing ones at the other end of this strut. To replace this missing tab, we're actually going to recreate it from scratch using some polystyrene sheets. Now this is Modeler's polystyrene sheets, and this is a 2mm sheet that I have picked up. You can pick this up again at most model shops, and it's really nice stuff to work with. So you can see this is a 2mm sheet, and it's very easy to cut and score, and it also glues incredibly well with plastic weld. So we are going to just recreate the missing tab. First thing though we've got to do is actually tidy up this end. You can see here that where this is snapped off, we're left with a sort of a little bit of a mess. So we're going to remove that. I'm just going to get a pair of plastic nippers from the side here, and I'm going to carefully cut away as much as that as I can, and I'll use a little file to file that nice and flat so that we've got a flat surface to work on. You can see the plastic is actually quite easy to sort of cut with the nippers. So you can see that's already looking a little bit flatter, and we also get a little file here, and I'm just going to file that down so that's a nice flat surface so that we've got something easy to work with, because there's no point in sort of starting with an awkward shape. You want something nice and flat. So I'll just file this away, and then we'll get started constructing the new tab. So now we've prepped that surface, it's nice and flat as you can see there, we can start constructing the new tab. And what I've done is already cut off a 15mm strip of the styrene plastic. I have a small ruler here, and I'm using a non-broken strut as my sort of guide. So you can see if we measure this, that is 15mm. So I've started with a 15mm strip just because that means that everything I do basically uses this. It's all going to be that sort of size. Now this really is a lot easier if you have one of these to work from. You can do it sort of blind just by sort of measuring, and really you can see here, if we look, there's a slight taper to the tab. It sort of tapers in a little bit, and also if we look from the front, the open side is nice and flat, but it tapers in, so you just have to sort of remember that as you're constructing. So what we can do is I'm going to take my 15mm strip here, and I'm going to lay the unbroken one on top of it, and I'm going to get myself a pencil, and I'm just going to sort of measure or sort of mark around so that I've got a rough shape for what we need. We don't actually need the curves, we're just going to sort of worry about the general shape of it. So you can see there. And now we're going to cut that off just using a scalpel. Don't need anything much more than that. So I have a scalpel here, and I can score along these lines. And you only need to score quite lightly, because that's the great thing with styrene. It snaps if you bend it, and that's the sort of bit that we need, sort of the principle we need, because it makes it very easy to work with. So I'm just gently scoring along these lines. And now we can start the construction. You can see if I bend this, it will just snap. And keep these pieces because we'll be using them later on. I snap that there. You can now see that we have the starting point for this tab. It's roughly the right shape. I'm going to do a little bit of sanding just to take off some of the sort of the bulkier edges, but that will be the basis for our new tab. So I'll just do a little bit of sanding and we'll start constructing properly. Now we need to construct two edges. We've got the sort of main shape of it, so you can see that is that part. So what you've got to do is sort of place that on the edge so you can see roughly how deep this next piece needs to be. We're going to make some little edges. So I'm just going to sort of hold that up on there. And we can place these together. It just sort of gives you an idea of roughly what sort of size you're working to. So you can see we need to cut quite a chunk off that, but not too bad. So again, I'm going to score this piece of styrene, and I will snap off the edges, and I'll make two edges which we can then stick in place with some plastic weld and start forming the basic shape. Now I've got the basic structure of the tab sort of constructed. I've got the main sort of face plate and two edges. We can start sticking these bits together because it's much easier to work on once you start to get sort of the rough shape of it. So we're just going to use a bit of plastic weld. I'm going to take a little bit of plastic weld onto my brush and just carefully sort of brush it down the edge of this. And because this is styrene, again, it does dissolve quite nicely and quite easily. And I can just drop that on, and that should sort of almost stick straight away, which it has, and we can stick the other piece on as well. And we'll let that sort of go off for a fair while because we want this to be quite sturdy, because we can then start sanding and filing and sort of generally giving it a bit more shape. This is, at this stage, we're just sort of constructing a fairly rough shape, something that we can sort of work with in future. So I'll just stick those bits together. But you can see that already starts to look like the missing tab piece. But if we let that all sort of set properly, we can then start filing and filling in the missing pieces, and we'll make something that looks much more like the missing tab. And the last thing I want to do before I start sort of finally shaping this is actually to put in the top section. You can see here at the moment we've got a sort of little open C shape, but on these original tabs they have a piece of cross with a little sort of indent filed into them. So I've just cut off a very small piece of the styrene, and I'm going to push that into that gap. You can see that fits quite nicely, and this one I'm just going to hold in with my finger like so. I will get a bit of plastic weld on the brush and then just brush that on, and we'll get that glued in place. And once that's all fully set, we can now then start to shape this and make this look exactly like the tab should have done. I've now given this a few minutes just for the to let the solvent sort of evaporate and everything sort of go off, and that's now really quite firm, and you can see that we're starting to get something that looks a little bit like the original tab that was missing, but it's sort of rough around the edges. So I'm now going to start fine-tuning this, and all I'm going to do is get a little bit of sandpaper. This is a very fine grit sandpaper, and just start sort of filing down some of the edges, because you can see we've got very sharp edges, and these original posts have sort of curved edges. So I'm just going to do a little bit of filing down. There's no real sort of definite way I'm going to do this. It's just going to be done by eye until I'm happy with the sort of overall look of the piece, and then once we've got that in, we can sort of start sorting out attaching it to the sort of remaining part of the strut, and also filing in the little hole that we need here. As you can see at the top, there's a little hole there where a piece of plastic in the original base sort of slides into, so we can file that in as well. But really, to start with, just a bit of fine tuning with some sandpaper just to sand this into a better sort of finished shape. Right, that's starting to look like what I want it to look like, so we can just hold this up against the original tab there, and that's not looking too bad. So the final thing is just to file in this little tab. I probably could have just actually done that with sort of made my life a little bit easier by cutting that a bit short. I might see if I can actually just trim that, and hopefully this glue will hold nicely. If it doesn't matter, we can always sort of re-glue it. Oh, actually that's not so bad. That's pretty good. I know I've got a little square needle file here, so I'm just going to file that out a little bit as well. Make this look nice and tidy. Trim that little edge off. There you go, I think that should match. You want that in exactly the same spot as the original, because that is quite a key piece of getting this to work. But overall, I'm happy with the shape of that. As you can see, it's not the easiest of things to do, but it just takes a little bit of thought. And using this styrene makes it sort of a fairly straightforward job, because it's very easy to cut. And once it's glued in place using the plastic weld, you can really sort of just go quite to town with sort of filing and sanding and get something that looks quite good. Now we can sort of do a sort of test placing. So this is the original post, and you can see on the bottom you can just about make out the shape of the original post. So we're just going to hold that in place and just make sure that sort of lines up, which it does. So we can now go ahead and glue that on, and again we're going to be using plastic weld, so I'll get the plastic weld up. We'll put a little bit on this, and we'll put a little bit on there just to sort of slightly make the surfaces sticky. Then we can hold the two together and put a bit more plastic weld around just to make sure that everything bonds nice and strongly, and that should give us a good replacement tab. Okay, so the plastic weld is here. I'm going to brush that onto the bottom just to try and get this to start sort of going a little bit soft. It should do. Put a little bit on the top of this, and we can hold the two pieces together. It should start to stick. Which it has done, and now I'm going to sort of liberally apply this again, because this is sort of hidden inside. I don't need to be too neat. We just want to make sure this is a very strong bond. That's looking good, so I'm going to let that set. Actually on this one I'm probably going to let it set for sort of half an hour, just make sure everything is evaporated and make sure the plastic has gone back to its original sort of strength, and then we can try that on the Death Star. And while I was waiting for that one to dry fully, I've constructed another of the tabs that was missing. So these are the top section struts, and you can see that was missing its little top peg there, so I've recreated that one as well. With a bit of practice you can make these in about sort of 5 to 10 minutes, and you can see once they're glued on they are really strong and really sturdy. So it's not the quickest of fixes, but it's certainly something that's worth doing if you have a Death Star in this condition, because finding these with unbroken tabs is sort of getting harder to do, and more often than not you'll find them missing them like these are. So just a little bit of this 2mm styrene sheet and you can recreate them pretty nicely, and the plastic world really does do a very good job of sticking these in place. So these are all ready to go. We can get the Death Star put back together. Before we put the whole of the Death Star together, I just want to test that these new struts actually work. So this is the strut where we glued the end back on with some plastic weld. You can see that fits in really nicely and that comes out very easily. This is the end which I have recreated, so we can just test that in there. You can see that does work really well, fits in very nicely and is easy to remove. And then we can do the same with the larger strut. That one actually plugs into this section, so we can just do a quick test fit that works as well. So these new strut ends do seem to work quite nicely, and I can go ahead and put all the levels back onto this Death Star. As you can see, the Death Star is actually starting to take shape now by putting in those extra levels. We've got it as tall as it is going to be, and all of those struts are holding in place very nicely. So the fixes I've done are certainly working very well. What we need to do now is sort out the missing cardboard walls that go here on the first and second floors of the Death Star playset. The Death Star comes with two cardboard inserts that act as the walls for the first and second floor, and you can see here this is the one that I was given with this set, and it's in a fairly tatty condition. It's fairly sort of beaten and worn. There's lots of bits missing from it, and I was thinking I could scan this in and sort of do the work and repair all of this and then print it out again, but I actually in the end decided just to get in touch with my friend Darren, who runs Replicator boxes and inserts.com, because he does all of the sort of replacement and restored boxes for most of the Kenner Star Wars stuff, and I know that he'd already done both of these panels, so I got in touch with Darren and he very kindly sent me some new versions which have just arrived in this package here. So we're going to go ahead and open these and see how good they look. I've had stuff from Darren before, and it does look fantastic and works really well, so I'm always happy to use his products. Now of course, if you want to do your own printouts, you can get scans of the cardboard inserts online, so you will be able to print them out yourself, but sometimes it's just easier to get someone else to do it. But in this instance there's a lot of restoration already going on with the Death Star, so it's one less job for me to do. So here we go, here are the two panels. I'm just going to take those out. So you can see this is that panel I was just holding. In fact, I will go and get that because I just put it on the floor. There you go, so we can compare the two. Now this one is pretty faded and damaged. As I said, this was the one that I had with the Death Star that I was sent. So here's the replacement. You can see it's quite a nice print out there, good quality. Just compare that, and it's nice and bright colours again. All the sort of damage that you can see on mine has is obviously not on there because this is a much better scan, so that's really nice. And then the panel that I didn't have is this one. Again, this is the inside with the X-Wing and TIE Fighter fighting there, and on the other side you can see that's the outer panel as we'll see on the outside of the Death Star. So as I say, these are available from Replicator Boxes and Inserts.com. I will put a link in the description so you can go and get your own versions of these. But just a big thanks again to Darren for very kindly sending these over. We can now insert these panels into the Death Star. They go around a certain way because one panel is slightly smaller than the other one. Then that smaller panel is the top one, and if we turn them around, this is the outside of the Death Star, and these panels show the insides of the Death Star. So all I've got to do is slide them into the little grooves that are on each of the levels. We can slide this one in, slides all the way around like so, and we'll do the same on the next one. So I'll put that into the grooves on the floors, and we can slide that round. And there you go, that's the outside of the Death Star, looking pretty good. I'll turn the playset around and we can take a look on the inside. As you can see, the panels do make quite a big difference to how the Death Star playset looks. It really starts to sort of finish it off, although there are still quite a few areas that need fixing on this. So make sure and join me in part 3 where I will continue to complete this restoration. We've got the rope swing to sort out, we've got the gun to sort out on the top, which I know has a few problems, and there's a few other little issues that need to be fixed and sorted. So I want to say a massive thank you again to Kevin M, who very kindly donated the sort of bulk of this playset. I also need to say a thank you to Clint Warren, Steve Edmonds and Michael Davis, who all helped supply parts for this project. If you've enjoyed this video, then make sure to subscribe and click the bell to be notified of each time I upload a new video. And I want to say also a massive thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon, because without the Patrons I wouldn't be able to do some of these larger projects. So please check out the link in my description for that, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.